Hello, Dawn Moore at Allegiance Title Company. Today I want to discuss the laws governing the disclosure of defects that exists on real property by a seller to a potential buyer. I get multiple questions on this issue every day. So I need to remind you that there are two bodies of law that govern the disclosure of property defects by a seller to a potential buyer. There is common law, which requires every seller of every real property type, residential or commercial, to disclose defects he knows or should have known exist on real property to a potential buyer. Then there is statutory law, which you know as the seller's disclosure notice law. These are two different laws with two different ramifications. The seller's disclosure notice law comes under Texas Property Code 5.008. It requires certain sellers of residential property to disclose defects he knows or should have known exist on the property in the form of the statutory seller's disclosure notice law or a form substantially similar to that. Failure of a particular seller of residential property to provide that seller's disclosure notice on or before execution of the contract allows a buyer to terminate the contract within 7 days of receipt of that seller's disclosure notice, and they can terminate for any reason, or if they never receive the seller's disclosure notice, they can terminate it up to closing. Common law, on the other hand, states that every seller must disclose defects, and failure to disclose defects can open the seller up to a lawsuit for failure to disclose. That lawsuit arises after a buyer buys and finds out that this is a defect the seller didn't disclose, and the buyer is damaged by it. It could subject a seller for failure to disclose up to treble damages. Therefore, I want to remind you, a seller who says, I don't have to provide the seller's disclosure notice law because I'm one of the exemptions under the seller's disclosure notice law, may be very accurate in that statement, but you must explain to the seller, just because you're exempt under the seller's disclosure notice law from having to provide the seller's disclosure notice form, you are not exempt under common law from having to disclose defects. Under common law, you can disclose defects either orally or in writing. However, as a seller, I would always hate to take my chances of the buyer's word against my word. I'd rather have it in writing to evidence my disclosure. And since the buyers are fairly familiar now, and there is a statutory form and a form in particular areas that have been expanded on that statutory form, it might be wise for a seller to go ahead and fill out the seller's disclosure notice form to disclose defects he knows or should have known, irrespective of whether he is subject to the seller's disclosure notice law. Specifically, I have a lot of people coming to me saying, since the son is selling his parents' property as executor of the state, he does not have to disclose any of the defects, does he? The answer to that question is no. He must disclose defects he knows or should have known. He doesn't have to put it in the seller's disclosure notice format. So again, remind your sellers who try and claim an exemption from having to provide the seller's disclosure notice form that they have to disclose defects they know or should have known anyway. The seller's disclosure notice form may be the best format to disclose when common law requires it, but the statute does not. I hope this makes sense to you and you understand the requirement to disclose defects of real property and that it applies to every seller no matter what capacity they're working in under this particular transaction. Allegiance Title wants to be here for you. If you have any questions, please contact me. We are your resource for results. We do also want to thank those of you who have joined us this month in our Closing for the Cure campaign. For every order we receive this month, we are donating a portion of our proceeds to the American Cancer Society in their fight against breast cancer. Thank you.